Last time we spoke about the continuation of the war after Nanjing's fall. The fall of Nanjing in December of 1937 marked a pivotal juncture in the Second Sino-Japanese War, ushering in a brutal phase of attrition that shaped both strategy and the diplomacy in early 1938. As Japanese forces sought to restructure China's political order, their strategy extended beyond the battlefield victories to the establishment of puppet arrangements and coercive diplomacy. Soviet aid provided critical support, while German and broader Axis diplomacy wavered, shaping a nuanced backdrop for China's options. In response, China's decisions focused on defending crucial rail corridors and urban strongholds, with Wuhan emerging as a strategic hub, and the Jingpu and Longhai railways becoming lifelines of resistance. The defense around Suzhou and the Hui River system illustrated Chinese determination to prolong resistance despite daunting odds. By early 1938, the war appeared as a drawn-out struggle, with China conserving core bases even as Japan pressed towards central China. This episode is the Battle of Taierzhuang. Hello again and welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia, and so much more. So go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube. You can help produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget our sister podcasts over at the Eastern Front and Pacific War week-by-week podcasts, both written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and my podcast series, Echoes of War, found on major podcast platforms. Over on Echoes of War, we are just finishing up a mini-series covering the Greco-Persian Wars. And if you're looking to support me further, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the-Pacific-War-channel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, which is 33 episodes and ongoing, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Following their victory at Nanjing, the Japanese North China Area Army sought to push southwards and link up with the Japanese 11th Army between Beijing and Nanjing. The two formations were intended to advance along the northern and southern ends of the Jingpu Railway, meet at Suzhou, and then coordinate a pincer movement into Chinese strongholds in the central Yangtze region, capturing Zhejiang first and then Wuhan. Recognizing Suzhou's strategic importance, Chinese leadership made its defense a top priority. Suzhou stood at the midpoint of the Jingpu line, and at the intersection with the Longhai line, China's main east-west corridor from Lanzhou to Lianyungang. If captured, Japanese control of these routes would grant mobility for the north-south movements across central China. At the end of January, Chiang Kai-shek convened a military conference in Wuchang, and he declared the defense of Suzhou the highest strategic objective. Chinese preparations expanded from an initial core of 80,000 troops to about 300,000, deployed along the Jingpu and Longhai lines, to draw in and overstretch the Japanese offensive. Now, a frightening reality loomed by late March of 1938. The Japanese were nearing victory over the Suzhou front. The North China Area Army, led by Generals Itagaki Seishiro, Nishio Tosio, and Isogai Rensuke, aimed to link up with the Central Chinese Expeditionary Force under General Hata Shenroku for a coordinated drive into central China. Li Zongren and his senior colleagues, including Generals Bai Chengqi and Tang Yanbo, resolved to meet the Japanese at the traditional stone-walled city of Taierzhuang. Taierzhuang was not large, but it held strategic significance. It sat along the Grand Canal, China's major north-south waterway, and on a railway line that connected the Jingpu and Longhai lines, thus bypassing Suzhou. Chiang Kai-shek himself visited Suzhou on March 24th. While Suzhou remained in Chinese hands, the Japanese forces to the north and south were still separated. Losing Suzhou would close the pincer. By late March, Chinese troops seemed to be gaining ground at Taierzhuang, but the Japanese began reinforcing, pulling soldiers from General Isogai Rensuke's columns. The defending commanders grew uncertain about their ability to hold the position. Yet Chiang Kai-shek made his stance clear in April 1st of 1938 in this telegram, stating, The enemy at Taierzhuang must be destroyed. Chiang Kai-shek dispatched his vice chief of staff, Bei Chongxi, to Suzhou in January of 1938. Li Xiangren and Bei Chongxi were old comrades from the New Guangxi clique, and their collaboration dated back to the Northern Expedition, including the Battle of Longtan. Li also received the 21st Group Army from the Third War Area. This Guangxi unit, commanded by Li Wei, comprised the 7th and 47th Armies. At around the same time, Sun Jian's 22nd Group Army, a sino-Japanese clique unit, arrived in the Shanxi-Henan region, but he was rebuffed by both Yan Xishan, then commander of the Second War Area and Shanxi's chairman, along with Chen Chuang, the commander of the First War Area Army and Henan's chairman. Yan and Cheng harbored strong reservations about Sichuan units due to discipline issues, notably their rampant use of opium. Under Sun Jian's leadership, the 22nd Group Army deployed 4 of its 6 divisions to aid the northern China effort. Organized under the 41st and the 45th Armies, the contingent began a foot march towards Taierzhuang on September the 1st, covering more than 50 days and approximately 1.4 thousand kilometers. Upon reaching Shanxi, they faced a harsh, icy winter, and they had no winter uniforms or even a single map of the province. They nevertheless engaged the Japanese for 10 days at Yangchuan, suffering heavy casualties. Strapped for supplies, they broke into a Shanxi clique supply depot, which enraged Yan Xishan and led to their expulsion from the province. The 22nd withdrew westwards into the First War Area, only to have its request for resupply rejected by Changchuan. Meanwhile, to the south, Colonel Ri Gisu led the Japanese 13th Division to push westwards from Nanjing in 2 columns during early February. The northern column targeted Mingguang, while the southern column aimed for Chushan. Both routes were checked by Wei Yunsong's 31st Army, which had been assigned to defend the southern stretch of the Jinpu Railway line under Li Xiangren. Despite facing a clearly inferior force, the Japanese could not gain ground after more than a month of sustained attacks. In response, Japan deployed armored and artillery reinforcements from Nanjing. The Chinese withdrew to the southwestern outskirts of Dingyuan to avoid a direct clash with their reinforced adversaries. By this point, Yu Shizhong's 51st Army had taken up a defensive position on the northern banks of the Hui River, establishing a line between Bangbu and Haiyuan. The Japanese then captured Mingguang, Dingyuan, and Bangbu in succession, and they pressed towards Haiyuan. However, their supply lines were intercepted by the Chinese 31st Corps, which conducted flanking attacks from the southwest. The situation worsened when the Chinese 7th Army, commanded by Li Wei, arrived at Hefei to reinforce the 31st Army. Facing 3 Chinese corps simultaneously, the Japanese were effectively boxed south of the Hui River, and despite air supremacy and superior overall power, they could not advance further. As a result, the Chinese thwarted the Japanese plan to move the 13th Division north along the Jinpu Railway line to link up with the Isogai 10th Division and execute a pincer against Suzhou. Meanwhile, in the north, after an amphibious landing at Qingdao, the Japanese 5th Division, commanded by Seishiro Itagaki, advanced southwest along the Taiwei Highway, spearheaded by the 21st Infantry Brigade. They faced Pang Bingshun's 3rd Group Army. Although labeled a group army, Pang's force actually comprised only the 40th Army, which itself consisted of the 39th Division from the Northwestern Army, commanded by Ma Fa'u. The 39th Division's 5 regiments delayed the Japanese advance towards Linyi for over a month. The Japanese captured Zhu County on the 22nd of February, and they moved towards Linyi by March the 2nd. The 59th Army, commanded by Zhang Zhujiang, led its troops on a forced march day and night towards Linyi. Seizing the opportunity, the 59th Army did not rest after reaching Yushui. In the early morning of the 14th, Zhang Zhujiang ordered the entire army to covertly cross the Yushui River and attack the right flank of the Japanese Iron Army, that being the 5th Division. They broke through the enemy defenses at Tingzutou, Dai Taiping, Xianxia Taiping, Shijia Taiping, and Jialingzhi. Initially caught off guard, the enemy sustained heavy losses, and over a night more than 1,000 Japanese soldiers were annihilated. The 59th Army fought fiercely, engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat. By 4 a.m. on the 17th, the 59th Army had secured all of the Japanese main positions. That same day, Pang Bingshun seized the moment to lead his troops in a fierce flank attack, effectively supporting the 59th Army's frontal assault. On the 18th, Zhang and Pang's forces attacked the Japanese from the east, south, and west. After 3 days and nights of bloody fighting, they finally defeated the 3rd Battalion of the 11th Regiment, which had crossed the river, and they annihilated most of it. The 59th Army completed its counterattack but suffered over 6,000 casualties, with more than 2,000 Japanese killed or wounded. News of the Ligny victory prompted commendations from Chiang Kai-shek and Li Zongren. General Li Zongren, commander of the 5th War Zone, judged that the Japanese were temporarily unable to mount a large-scale offensive, and that Ligny could be held for the time being. On March 20th, he ordered the 59th Army westwards to block the Japanese Seiya detachment. March 21st, the Japanese Sakamoto detachment, after a brief reorganization and learning of the Ligny detachment's plight, launched another offensive. The 3rd Corps, under strength and without reinforcements, were compelled to retreat steadily before the Japanese. General Pang Bingchun, commander of the 3rd Corps, urgently telegraphed Chiang Kai-shek requesting reinforcements. Chiang Kai-shek received the telegram, and at approximately 9 a.m. on the 23rd, he ordered the 59th Army to return to Ligny to join with the 3rd Corps in repelling the Sakamoto detachment. Fierce fighting ensued with heavy Chinese losses, and the situation in the Ligny area again grew precarious. At a critical moment, the 333rd Brigade of the 111th Division and a cavalry regiment of the 13th Army were rushed to reinforce Ligny. Facing attacks from 2 different directions, the Japanese were forced to withdraw, losing almost 2 battalions in the process. This engagement shattered the myth of Japanese invincibility and embarrassed their commander, Seishiro Itagaki, even startling the Imperial Japanese Army headquarters. Although the 5th Division later regrouped and attempted another push, it had lost the element of surprise. The defeat at Ligny at the hands of comparatively poorly equipped Chinese regional units set the stage for the eventual battle of Taierzhuang. Of the 3 Japanese divisions advancing into the Chinese 5th War area, and the 10th Division commanded by Rensuke Isogai, managed to achieve the greatest initial success. Departing from Hubei, it crossed the Yellow River and moved south along the Jinpu railway line. With the KMT General Han Fuju ordering his forces to desert their posts, the Japanese managed to capture Jiaotun and reach Jinan without much resistance at all. They then pushed south along 2 columns from Tai'an. The eastern column captured Mangyin before driving west to seize Xieshi. The western column moved southwest along the Jinpu railway line, capturing Yanzhou, Zhoushan, and Jining before turning northwest to take Wenxiang. Chiang Kai-shek subsequently ordered Li Zongren to employ offensive defense, seizing the initiative to strike rather than merely defend. They deployed Sun Jian's 22nd Group Army to attack Zhoushan from the south, while Pang Bingchun's 40th Division advanced north along the 22nd's left flank to strike Mengyin and Xishui. Sun Tongshuang's 3rd Group Army also advanced from the south, delivering a 2-pronged assault on the Japanese at Jining. Fierce fighting from the 12th to 25th of February, particularly by the 12th Corps, helped mitigate the reputational damage previously inflicted on Shandong units by Han Fuju. In response to the Chinese counterattacks, the Japanese revised their strategy. They canceled their original plan to push directly westwards from Nanjing towards Wuhan, freeing more troops up for the push towards Suzhou. On March 15th, the Japanese 10th Division struck the Chinese 122nd Division, focusing the action around Tengchuan and Linqiang. Chinese reinforcements from the 85th Corps arrived the following day, but they were driven back by March 17th. With air support, tanks, and heavy artillery, the Japanese easily breached the Chinese lines on March 18th. The remaining Chinese forces, bolstered by the 52nd Corps, withdrew to the town of Yixuan. The Japanese attacked Yixuan, and then they overran the entire Chinese regiment there in a brutal 24-hour engagement. By March 19th, the Japanese began advancing to the walled town of Taierzhuang. To counter the Japanese advance, the Chinese 2nd Area Group under General Sun Lianzhong was deployed to Taierzhuang. The 31st Division, commanded by General Qi Fengcheng, reached Taierzhuang on March 22nd. He was ordered to delay the Japanese advance until the remainder of the army group could arrive. On March 23rd, the 31st Division sallied from Taierzhuang towards Yixian, where they were engaged by 2 Japanese battalions reinforced with 3 tanks and 4 armored cars. The Chinese troops occupied a series of hills and managed to defend against a Japanese regiment, about 3,000 men, for the rest of the day. On March 24th, a Japanese force of about 5,000 attacked the 31st Division. Another Japanese unit pressed the Chinese from Yishan, forcing them to withdraw back into Taierzhuang itself. The Japanese then assaulted the town, with a 300-strong contingent breaching the northeastern gate at about 8 o'clock. They were subsequently driven back towards the Taierzhuang temple, which the Chinese set on fire, annihilating the Japanese force there. The next day, the Japanese renewed their assault through the breached gate and secured the eastern portion of the district, while also breaking through the northwest corner from the outside and capturing the Wanchang Pavilion. On March 25th, a morning Japanese onslaught was repelled. The Japanese then shelled Chinese positions with artillery and airstrikes. In the afternoon, the Chinese deployed an armored train towards Yishan, which ambushed a column of Japanese soldiers near a hamlet, killing or wounding several dozen before retreating back to Taierzhuang. By nightfall, about 3,000 Chinese troops launched a night assault, pushing the Japanese lines northeast to dawn. The following 3 days subjected the Chinese defenders to sustained aerial and artillery bombardment. The Chinese managed to repulse several successive Japanese assaults, but sustained thousands of casualties in the process. On March 28th, Chinese artillery support arrived, including 2 155mm and 10 75mm pieces. On the night of March 29th, the Japanese finally breached the wall. Setting out from the district's southern outskirts, a Chinese assault squad stormed the Wanchang Pavilion from the south and east, killing nearly the entire Japanese garrison, aside from 4 taken as prisoners of war. The Chinese then retook the northwestern corner of the district. Even by the brutal standards already established in the war, the fighting at Taierzhuang was fierce, with combatants facing one another in very close quarters. Commander Shen Chang's notes preserve the battlefield memories of Qifang Chang, one of the campaign's standout officers. "We had a battle for the little lanes of the town, and unprecedentedly, not just the streets and lanes, but even the courtyards and the houses. Neither side was willing to budge. Sometimes we'd capture a house and dig a hole in the wall to approach the enemy. Sometimes the enemy would be digging a hole in the same wall at the same time. Sometimes we faced each other with hand grenades, or we might even bite each other. Or when we could hear that the enemy was in the house, then we'd climb the roof and drop bombs inside, kill them all." The battle raged for a week. On April 1st, General Qi requested volunteers for a near-suicide mission to seize a building. Among 57 men selected, only 10 survived. A single soldier claimed to have fired on a Japanese bomber and succeeded in bringing it down. He and his comrades then set the aircraft ablaze before another plane could arrive to rescue the pilot. One participant described the brutal conditions of the battle as this: "The battle continued day and night. The flames lit up the sky. Often all that separated our forces was just a single wall. The soldiers would beat holes in the masonry to snipe in at each other. We would be fighting for days over a single building, causing dozens of fatalities." The conditions were so brutal that Chinese officers imposed severe measures to maintain discipline. Junior officers were repeatedly forbidden to retreat, and they were often ordered to personally replace casualties with their ranks. Yi Zhangren even warned Tang Yanbo that failure to fulfill his duties would lead him to be treated as Han Fuju had been. In Taierzhuang's cramped streets, Japanese artillery and air supremacy offered little advantage. Whenever either service was employed amidst the dense melee, casualties were roughly equal on both sides. The fighting devolved into close-quarters combat carried out primarily by infantry, with rifles, pistols, and hand grenades, bayonets, and knives forming the core of each side's arsenal. The battle unfolded largely in hand-to-hand combat, frequently in darkness. The stone buildings of Taierzhuang provided substantial cover from fire and shrapnel. It was precisely under those close-quarters conditions that Chinese soldiers could finally stand as equals against the Japanese, if not superior. In many respects, they were mirroring the experiences seen in Liaojian, Shanghai, the year before. On March 31st, General Sun Liangzhang arrived to assume command of the 2nd Area Group. A Japanese assault later that day was repulsed, but a Chinese counterattack also stalled. At about 4 a.m. on April 1st, the Japanese attacked the Chinese lines with support from over 11 tanks. The Chinese defenders, armed with the German-made 37mm PaK-36 anti-tank guns, destroyed 8 of the armored vehicles at point-blank range. Similar incidents reoccurred throughout the battle, with numerous Japanese tanks getting knocked out by Chinese artillery and by suicide squads. In one engagement, Chinese suicide bombers annihilated 4 Japanese tanks with bundles of grenades. On April the 2nd and 3rd, Qi urged the Chinese defenders around Taierzhuang's northern station to assess the evolving situation. The troops reported distress, crying and sneezing caused by tear gas deployed by the Japanese against the Chinese positions at Taierzhuang's northern station, but the defenders remained unmoved. They then launched a massive armored assault outside the city walls with 30 tanks and 60 armored cars, yet managed only to drive the Chinese 27th Division back to the Grand Canal. The fighting continued to rage on April the 4th and 5th. By then, the Japanese had captured roughly 2/3 of Taierzhuang, though the Chinese still held the southern gate. It was through this entry point that the Chinese command managed to keep their troops supplied. The Chinese also thwarted Japanese efforts to replenish their dwindling stocks of arms and ammunition. In consequence, the Japanese attackers were worn down progressively. Although the Japanese possessed superior firepower, including cannon and heavy artillery, the cramped conditions within Taierzhuang nullified this advantage for the moment. The Chinese command succeeded in keeping their own supplies flowing, a recurring weakness in other engagements that also prevented the Japanese from replenishing their dwindling stock of arms and bullets. Gradually, the Japanese maneuvered into a state of attrition. The deadlock of the battle was broken by events unfolding outside of Taierzhuang, where fresh Chinese divisions had encircled the Japanese forces in Taierzhuang from the flanks and rear. After consulting their German advisors earlier, the commanders of the Fifth War Area prepared a double envelopment of the exposed Japanese forces in Taierzhuang. Between March and April of 1938, the Nationalist Air Force deployed squadrons from the 3rd and 4th Pursuit Groups, fighter attack aircraft in long-distance air interdictions and close air support of Taierzhuang's operations. Approximately 30 aircraft, mostly Soviet-made, were deployed in bombing raids against the Japanese positions. On March 26, Tang Embo's 20th Army, equipped with artillery units, attacked Japanese forces at Yixuan, inflicting heavy casualties and routing the survivors. Tang then swung south to strike the Japanese flank northeast of Taierzhuang. Simultaneously, the Chinese 55th Corps, comprised of 2 divisions, executed a surprise crossing of the Grand Canal, and then they cut off the railway line near Yincheng. As a result of this, Tang managed to isolate the Japanese attackers from their rear and severed their supply lines. On April the 1st, the Japanese 5th Division sent a brigade to relieve the encircled 10th Division. Tang countered by blocking the brigade's advance and then attacked them from the rear, driving them south into the encirclement. On April the 3rd, the Chinese 2nd Group Army launched a counteroffensive with the 30th and 110th Divisions, pushing them northwards into Beilou and Ningbo, respectively. By April the 6th, the Chinese 85th and 52nd Armies linked up at Taoyuan, just west of Lanling. The combined force then advanced northwestwards, capturing Ganlugo. 2 more Chinese divisions arrived a few days later. By April the 5th, Taierzhuang's Japanese units were fully surrounded, with 7 Chinese divisions to the north and 4 to the south closing in. The Japanese divisions inside Taierzhuang had exhausted their supplies, running critically low on ammunition, fuel, and food, while many troops endured fatigue and dehydration after more than a week of brutal fighting. Sensing imminent victory, the Chinese forces surged with a renewed fury and attacked the encircled Japanese, executing wounded soldiers where they lay with rifles and pistol shots. Chinese troops also deployed Soviet tanks against the defenders. Japanese artillery could not reply effectively due to a shortage of shells, and their tanks were immobilized by a lack of fuel. Attempts to drop supplies by air failed completely, with most packages actually falling into Chinese hands. Over time, Japanese infantry were progressively reduced to firing only their machine guns and mortars, then their rifles and machine guns, and ultimately they had to resort to bayonet charges. With the success of the Chinese counterattacks, the Japanese line finally collapsed on April the 7th. The 10th and 5th Divisions, drained of personnel and ammunition, were forced to retreat. By this point, around 2,000 Japanese soldiers managed to break out of Taierzhuang, leaving thousands of their comrades dead behind. Some of the escapees reportedly committed harakiri. Chinese casualties were roughly comparable, marking a significant improvement over the heavier losses suffered in battles at Shanghai and Nanjing. The Japanese had lost the battle for numerous reasons. Japanese efforts were hampered by the offensive-defensive operations carried out by various Chinese regional units, effectively preventing the 3 Japanese divisions from ever linking up with each other. Despite repeated use of heavy artillery, airstrikes, and gas, the Japanese could not expel the Chinese 2nd Group Army from Taierzhuang and its surrounding areas, even as the defenders risked total annihilation. The Japanese also failed to block the Chinese 20th Group Army's maneuver around their rear positions, which would sever their retreat routes and enable a Chinese counter-encirclement. After Han Fuju's insubordination and subsequent execution, the Chinese High Command tightened discipline at the top, transmitting a stringent order to flow down the ranks. This atmosphere of strict discipline inspired even junior soldiers to risk their lives in executing orders. A dare-to-die corps was effectively employed against the Japanese units. They used swords and wore suicide vests fashioned with grenades. Due to a lack of anti-armor weaponry, suicide bombing was employed against the Japanese. These dare-to-die corps would have explosives strapped to them, such as grenades or even dynamite. They would simply run at the Japanese tanks and blow themselves up. The Chinese leader asserted that about 20,000 Japanese had perished, though the actual toll was likely closer to 8,000. The Japanese also sustained heavy material losses. Because of fuel shortages and their rapid retreat, many tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces were abandoned on the battlefield and subsequently captured by the Chinese forces. Historian Frank Dorn recorded losses of about 40 tanks and over 70 armored cars and 100 trucks of various sizes. In addition to the vehicles, the Japanese lost dozens of artillery pieces and thousands of machine guns and rifles. Many of these weapons were collected by the Chinese for their future use. The Chinese side endured severe casualties, possibly up to 30,000. And of course, the walled city of Taierzhuang was razed to the ground. Yet, for once, the Chinese achieved a decisive victory, sparking an outburst of joy across unoccupied China. Du Zhongyuan would write of the glorious killing of the enemy. The victory delivered a much-needed morale boost to both the army and the broader population. Shan Cheng recorded evening conversations with soldiers from General Qi Fangcheng's division, who shared lighthearted banter with their senior officers. At one moment, the men recalled Qi as having given them the secret of war. When you get food, eat it. When you can sleep, take it. Such familiar brisk maxims carried extra resonance now that the nationalist forces had demonstrated their willingness and ability to stand their ground rather than retreat. The victors may have celebrated a glorious victory, but they did not forget that their enemies were human. Qi recalled the scene he encountered when he picked up a Japanese officer's helmet, its left side scorched by gunpowder with a trace of blood, the mark of a fatal wound taken from behind. Everywhere in Taierzhuang, relics of the fallen were found, images of the Buddha, wooden fish, and flags bearing slogans. A makeshift crematorium in the North Station had been interrupted mid-process. Not all the bones have been completely burned. After the battle, Li Zhongren asked Shang Cheng if he had found souvenirs on the battlefield. Shang Cheng replied that he had discovered love letters on the corpses of Japanese soldiers, as well as a photograph of a girl, perhaps a hometown sweetheart. It was labeled, 19 years old, February 1938. These details stood in stark contrast to news coverage that depicted the Japanese solely as Woren, a Chinese racial term that means dwarf. They also, of course, called the Japanese devils and bandits. The foreign community noted the new optimistic turn of events and the way it seemed to revive the resistance effort. American Ambassador Nelson Johnson wrote to Secretary of State Cordell Hull from Wuhan just a few days after the Battle of Taierzhuang, passing on reports from American military observers. One had spent time in Shanxi and had been impressed by communist success in mobilizing guerrilla fighters against the Japanese. Another had spent 3 days observing the fighting at Taierzhuang and confirmed that, quote, Chinese troops in the field there won a well-deserved victory over Japanese troops, administering the first defeat that Japanese troops had suffered in the field in modern times. This reinforced Johnson's view that Japan would need to apply far more force than it anticipated to pacify China. He noted that the mood in unoccupied China had likewise shifted. Conditions here at Hankow have changed from an atmosphere of pessimism to one of dogged optimism. The government is more united under Chiang Kai-shek, and there is a feeling that the future is not entirely hopeless due to the recent failures of the Japanese armies at Shuzhou. I find no evidence for a desire for peace by compromise amongst Chinese, and I doubt whether the government could persuade its army or its people to accept such a peace. The spirit of resistance is slowly spreading amongst the people who are awakened to a feeling that this is their war. Japanese air raids in the interior and atrocities by Japanese soldiers upon civilian populations are responsible for the stiffening of the people. The British had been long wary of Chiang Kai-shek, but Sir Archibald Clark Kerr, the British ambassador in China, wrote to the new British Foreign Secretary, Lord Halifax, on April the 29th of 1938, shortly after the Taierzhuang victory. He offered grudging credit to China's leader. Chiang Kai-shek has become the symbol of Chinese unity, which he himself has so far failed to achieve, but which the Japanese are well on the way to achieving for him. The days when Chinese people did not care who governed them seems to have gone. My visit to central China from out of the gloom and the depression of Shanghai has left me stimulated and more than disposed to believe that, provided the financial end can be kept up, Chinese resistance may be prolonged and effective, that, in the end, the Japanese effort may be frustrated. Chiang Kai-shek is obstinate and difficult to deal with. Nonetheless, the nationalists are making in their muddling the exhilaration of a rare victory. Chiang pressured Tang and Li to build on their success, increasing the area's troop strength to about 450,000. Yet the Chinese army remained plagued by deeper structural issues. The parochialism that had repeatedly hampered Chiang's forces over the past 6 months resurfaced. Although the various generals had agreed to unite in the broader war of resistance, each prioritized the safety of his own troops, wary of any move by Chiang Kai-shek to centralize power. For example, Li Zhongren refrained from utilizing his top Guangxi forces at Taierzhuang, attempting to shift the bulk of the fighting onto Tang and Bo's units. The generals were aware of the fates of their two colleagues. Han Fuju of Shandong was executed for his refusal to fight, while Jiang Shiliang of Manchuria had allowed Chiang to reduce the size of his northeastern army and ended up under house arrest. They were justified in not trusting Chiang Kai-shek. He truly believed, after all, that provincial armies should come under a national military command led by himself. From a national unity standpoint, Chiang Kai-shek's aim was not unreasonable, but it bred suspicion amongst all the other military leaders that participation in the anti-Japanese war would erode their own power. The fragmented command structure also hindered logistics, making ammunition and food supplies to the front unreliable and easy to cut off a good job of things in extremely difficult circumstances. I'd like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Which helps produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And don't forget about our sister podcasts over at the Pacific War and Eastern Front Week by Week podcast, both written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. If you're looking to support me further, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. The Chinese victory at the Battle of Taierzhuang was a much-needed morale boost after the long string of defeats to Japan. As incredible as it was, however, it would only amount to merely a bloody nose for the Imperial Japanese Army. Now Japan would unleash even more devastation to secure Suzhou and ultimately march upon Wuhan.